Hi, about that. My name is Brian Joyce, and I am a graduate student at the University of Notre Dame. I work in the Computational Hydraulics Lab. And this webinar for this week is to be on the work we've been doing and just generally for Alaska, building a tide, storm surge, and wind wave model for forecasting coastal water levels coastal Alaska. This was funded through NOAA National Weather Service with also support from the Western Alaska Landscape Conservation Cooperative, and particularly from that group, Karen Murphy has helped us a lot, connect with different people in Alaska in getting this project rolling. We've been working on this in collaboration with a number of different people, but primarily people at the National Weather Service and Center for Prediction at NOAA, and have been going at this for about 4 years now. Here's a brief talk. I'll start with the motivation for why area in particular has specific challenges for work that we do in modeling coastal water levels and what needs in the area that are driving us to build this model in particular. Move on to how we're actually building our model, how it works, the different components of it, and how we've implemented the ice into tide and storm surge model. And this is be shown through an investigation of 3 different storms which occurred in the presence of different ice coverages. Then I'll go on to show a brief overview of the available storm surge guidance for Alaska as it stands now, and then future work that we hope that addresses the limitations both in where our model stands now and in the available storm surge guidance that exists out there for Alaska at the moment. Most of the innovation probably is not as necessary for most, for this group. People are aware of this and the difficulty in Alaska, but I like to highlight this at the beginning of my talks because it really is an interesting problem that's different, that has differences from how we would approach this in the rest of the world. See here is the main region that we care about. There's a different features in the Alaska region that create challenges when trying to model storm surge in this region. We have a wide variety of different types of bathymetries and topographies. So you can see in Alaska, we have very narrow shelves, a very mountainous topography, and a lot of interesting features like Cook Inlet, which can cause very interesting hydrodynamics. We have the Ocean Islands and the Trench, very important and cause a lot of interesting effects. The Bering Sea, the Bering Shelf itself, together in this enclosed basin, really cause a lot of complex tidal structure, which is vital to get correct in order to model water levels correctly at the coastline. And north, of course, we have the Chukchi and Beaufort Seas, which for most of the year are covered in ice, challenge in terms of predicting the water levels underneath that ice or the edges of that ice and how it changes seasonally. Yeah, I don't need to highlight to you guys, but the shearness of Alaska really is one of the main challenges of this problem. So here's Alaska overlaid over the continental United States, and in terms of miles of coastline or kilometers kilometers of coastline. The Austin coastline is approximately equal to the entire Gulf Coast and eastern coast of the United States. So, despite receiving significantly less attention than the Gulf Coast or East Coast combined, or even just one of those coasts, there's just as area, and it's at times an even more difficult problem in terms of predicting what the coastal water levels would be. And it's not, while most of the population of Alaska is concentrated in a few cities, there are people living throughout the entire coast. So it's important to be able to provide broad extent coverage of our storm surge model and tide model that covers the entire state of Alaska. So at each of these cities, we can get guidance to what potential storm surge level values might be. Looking at these coastal cities, they're very different than in some other regions of the world. Just looking at them immediately, you can see that they're very low-lying, and on that other map, they're very remote, so they're immediately more vulnerable to surges, waves, and flooding than a lot of other cities. And they don't have the infrastructure to cities at times when flooding occurs. The storm surge, these major storms occur. They usually occur in the late fall or winter period when sea ice isn't. So this diagram here kind of shows that, where the intensity of the storms, the darker values, shows these storms happen per year. If you look in the late fall and winter, the Alaska region gets significantly more storms in those periods of times from September to February. This is the same figure, but for the intensity of those storms, you can see the winter and the fall, those storms is stronger than in the summer. So in wintertime and late fall, when you have sea ice present in the Bering Sea and on the coast of Alaska, you get you have much more and much stronger storms. Storm that's really emblematic of this issue, which many of you know, is the November 2011 Bering Sea superstorm. It affected over 37 communities along the Alaskan coast, over 1,000 miles of coastline, called for a presidential disaster declaration and caused approximately dollars in damages, more. And many of these damage estimates were made difficult to make due to frozen conditions or or flooding, and then freezing, and then not being able to bet what damages were explicitly caused by the storm. In terms of comparing to East Coast or Gulf Coast storms, the hurricanes that happen during hurricane season, you can see in terms of strength of the storm, the wind speed and central pressure, which are going to be your two major drivers of surge. Bering Sea superstorm was very comparable, particularly central pressure, which causes a strong lift of the water surface elevation. And the largest storm surge recorded through the Bering Sea superstorm was great at, from, say, Hurricane Irene. And on top of the storm surge, you have waves, and these for the Bering Sea superstorm were larger than those measured or in Hurricane Irene. As earlier, when the storm is occurring on the East Coast or the Gulf Coast, you usually don't have the other environmental difficulties such as blizzards or flooding, which cause water to retreat days to months afterwards instead of hours, days afterwards, as it would flooding the East Coast or the Gulf Coast in some areas. Right, I'm just going to make sure.
I'm here. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Some flood images from the November 2011 storm. So these are on the western coast of Alaska. So much of what we're doing, since it was funded by the Western Alaska LCC, is focused on that western coastline. So see some flooding caused in one of those coastal communities. A little further in. Issue on these areas is coastal erosion. So particularly those large wave heights. And as the soil weakens, as the waves back the coast, and there's weakened soil from perhaps thawing or from other environmental issues, you can have this corrosion caused by wave action at the shoreline. Issue with the November 2011 storm, and then finally, as I mentioned, you had the question of ice. So you can see here's a room that was affected by the flood from the storm. Even after the water retreated, you still had large chunks of ice or frozen ice that was brought along with the storm that lasted afterwards. So predict when these events are going to happen and the exact impact that they're going to have is very important, because it allows you to prepare and perhaps mitigate issues like this and the thing that I showed earlier. I'm going to show how we built our model to start attacking these problems, and then going through the different components of the model, and specifically the tide and storm surge, how we've implemented sea ice into that storm surge model, and then how that sea ice implementation has performed for 3 different storms with very different ice coverages.
I don't want to interject, but just a quick reminder, there's about 30 minutes left for content before we get to question and answers. I was just looking at the number slides at the bottom there to let you know.
Yes, this is magic, don't worry.
Perfect, thanks.
So just the background of what we do at the University of Notre Dame, we're the Computational Hydraulics Lab. We build like this across the world. Most of the experience lab has been in the Atlantic or Gulf Coast. You can see here one of our highest resolution models, which is built for the Gulf Coast in Louisiana. So you can see here the levee systems and the Lake Pontchartrain. So we build very high resolution models, which are the coastal circulation model ADCIRC, which predicts coastal water levels and currents to inform guidance during storm surge events. Stations that I'm going to be showing are performed using ADCIRC. It's all the 2D depth average shallow water equations, again for water surface elevation and currents. And it's built finite element framework. So what that means is that we can use different elements, essentially, the different size grid points across the model, meaning we can put resolution in the model where we need it. So we can resolve a wide range of scales. So in the deep ocean, we can use large elements that don't require a lot of computation. And as you get near shore in the coastal estuaries and floodplains, we can add more elements and increase the fidelity model as we get closer to the areas that are more important. So here's just a setup of the problem we're going to solve here. So I mentioned there's a tide, a storm surge, and a wave portion to this problem. So to start, you need to get expected high tide or mean sea level correct. So the tide is important for establishing this baseline value at the expected high tide. Storm occurs, you have very strong winds and low pressures, and strong winds can push, essentially push water over changes in the bathymetry or how deep water is, and that can increase as it gets closer to the shore. And the literature, a similar effect of lifting up that low water level, that lifts up that water level and adding on to this total level here to get this value, which should be storm surge. The winds also produce higher frequency waves, and these will essentially ride on top of that larger scale storm surge that's created. And as these crash and break near the shore, they add to that water level and produce wave up and run in further wave run up. So this whole addition onto the mean sea level or mean water level is what we refer to as storm surge. In order to compute that for this region, we built this relatively large model for the entire Alaska region. So it includes the 4 main ocean basins, coast of the whole state. We have the Gulf of Alaska down here. We included all the islands and the Aleutian Trench, the entire Bering Sea, the entire west coast of Alaska, where we've focused on resolution, as that was where the main funding for this project came from. And then in the north, we have the Beaufort and Chukchi Seas, too. Two boundaries you see here are our open ocean boundaries. We're able to force the tides, essentially. And so where we're able to focus the resolution. So again, we have large elements out here in the deep ocean, and as we go closer to shore, we can increase the size of the elements so we can capture the finer features, say, in the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, or in Kotzebue Sound, or the Aleutian Islands. So here's just a few snapshots of zooming in. So here we have an area east of the Bering Strait, northeast of the Bering Strait, the lagoon and coastal or islands there, all resolved in the model. Really have a lot of resolution on the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, as that's important, especially tides. It can flood at times during a high tide, so that changes the dynamics. So including this in the model we found to be very important. A few areas north on the western coastline to Kivalina Lagoon and Kotzebue Sound, we have a fair resolution as well. Moving on, this is really how the model works. So essentially we these 2 open ocean boundaries here, and then pull information from a global model that some model predicts tides for the whole world ocean. And then we force our model for, say, 3-month to 6-month period of time and observe water levels across the whole model. We're then able to break down that signal into the major constituents. So essentially, what's the effect of the moon, the effect of the sun, and the general change, shape that makes on water levels, and how that changes over time. So we're able to tell the main constituents of the tide from a 6-month simulation. And the largest and most interesting constituent is tide. So this shows the water level produced by that section of the tide across the whole domain of our model. So you can ranges from over 3 meters and 3.5 meters in where you get really strong amplification of the tide due to the shape of that inlet, and then really small amplitudes up north of the Bering Sea where you have all this blockage by the Aleutian Islands and then closed nature of the Bering Strait. So what the closed Bering Strait, what that Bering Strait does is create a lot of come to the tide here on the Bering Shelf, where you have shallow shore water. you get a phase. This is essentially, instead of the amplitude of the tide, this is the timing of the tide. So single lines are where you would get high tide at the same time. You can see the complexity of how quickly the tide is changing across the Bering Shelf. So these views and the altitude values correct is really important for thinking how high the tide is going to be, so the mean water level, and when that high tide is going to happen. In terms of our validation, we do a pretty good to very good job in most places. We have areas where we are confident enough in the resolution or the measurement of the tide to validate it well, but overall we across the model. And this is really dependent on a bunch of different physics, but really resolving the Aleutian Islands correctly very important, and adding the full tide physics in there is necessary to capture the complexity of the tide in this area. So moving to the storm surge of our model, we've really focused. We started by focusing on where there was no ice to validate the baseline ability of the model to predict storm surge. And this first example here I'm going to show is August 2012 storm, which had about storm surge on the western coast of Alaska. And this is forced with the tidal forcing I talked about earlier, as well as wind speeds and atmospheric pressures. So we've used wind speed and atmospheric pressure data provided from NOAA, and they have this model of climate forecast system, CFSV2, and that produces wind speeds and atmospheric pressures at good enough resolution where we're able to force every node in the model with either wind or atmospheric pressure and let that drive the storm surge. The main challenges we have with validating and building this model is validating it at points we have to validate it at. So all the stations I showed for the tide model are not active. The number of active water level stations on the western coast of Alaska is relatively small, especially given the area. So we only really have 2, Nome and Red Dog Dock, to focus on how well the model performs. I said 2 more vetted, specifically in Uliquid. There's another one up in Prudhoe Bay, but that was not affected by the storm. So here you see the wind that we're forced to model with here on the left. And on the right is the storm surge predicted by the water level. So there's no tides included in this image here. You can just increase in water level due to the wind speed and atmospheric pressure, and the arrows are going to represent the current. So you can storm as it moves over the Bering Shelf and towards the western coast. You see an currents through the north in the direction of the wind speed, and then you'll see a strong increase in water level, specifically in Norton Sound and along the western coast of Alaska. You get up for 1.5 meters of storm surge here in Norton Sound. It recedes as the storm passes through. So at our point, water level observation stations, we compare a model to the NOAA co-ops observed results. So you can model here in red versus the co-ops result in blue. And we do a job specifically on the tide and on the peak water levels for this event and this event here as well. Farther north to Red Dock, we still get these increased water levels almost. So in order to include sea ice in this model, we've modeled the way that wind stress is calculated. So here we have the stress reduced by a certain wind speed u, and is modified by some coefficient, which typically just increases linearly with wind speed. So the more wind speed you have, the more stress you're going to have. The more that stress is going to transfer from the wind to the ocean. And to include sea ice in this calculation, since sea ice is on the top of the water, we're going to include sea ice through modifying this this coefficient. So what our investigated sea ice implementation does is take the open ocean portion of an element and the ice-covered portion of an element and weight the drag coefficient, whether it's a space drag coefficient or a ocean-based drag coefficient, and modify that stress exchange between ocean based off of this value. So what you see here is the percent change drag coefficient between the standard drag coefficient we use in our investigated implementation. Here on the left side you have percentage ice coverage, and here on the bottom you have wind speed. In fractured ice zones from about 30% to 70%, in wind speeds up to 25 meters per second, you can get a very strong increase in the drag coefficient here when you have that fractured ice coverage. You get to higher ice coverages and you have packed ice, and that's going to lower the transfer of stresses, have a potential decrease, as you see north of this black line, that you see a decrease in the drag coefficient and a potential decrease in the stress generated by the winds there. Look at this for 3 different storms. The November 2011 superstorm, 2011 storm, which caused a similar amount of storm surge at the coast, and there are dense pack ice here. This marginal ice zone, Bering shelf break, and a January 2017 storm, which occurred under a much more marginal ice field, which is more and more common as the climate is warming. So again, to the stations we're going to look at the response. The November 2011 storm. We have the wind speed here and the storm surge outside shown on the right. The storm is much larger and stronger than that August 2012 storm. And yet the storm surge values on the western coast of Alaska increase significantly as well. So here, as the storm moves onto the shelf, you get these strong velocities. 1.5 meters of storm surge here in North Sound. Our validation, we have run this with and without that mod drag coefficient, so with and without considering ice coverage, and see that we still do a good job on the tides, but with that mod drag coefficient, we see an increase in the storm surge predicted in the gold, which is with ice, versus red, which is without ice. So here we get almost a 20 to 30 centimeter increase, which is closer to the peak surge that occurs here. Still missing a significant amount of the surge predicted for this storm. We think that can be traced back to a number of issues, either with the winds or with not coupling fully to a wave model yet. Dock, you see something very similar. For this peak water level, we see a slight increase in coastal water levels that we've predicted when we include our ice parameterization. So some points to that we are over predicting this down here after the storm, and that could point to some potential limitations with how we're considering ice coverage. So at the ice field, you can see it's in this around 50% range along the whole coast. So at our parameters, and we expect there to be an increase in drag coefficient there. And so with the effect on water surface elevation, or the water level predicted by the model, we see in those areas there is an increase in those coastal ice areas. There is an increase in water level due to the ice. And at February 2011, you might expect that would be different, as you have this pack ice instead of this forming coastal ice. It's very similar to the November storm in terms of its track and the surge that we've predicted. You can see in through the Bering Sea here, and then increase levels along the western coastline of Alaska. So when we get our station at we have increased coastal water levels. This is not the expected result where this pack would cut out a lot of the energy from the surge, or cut off a lot of the wind transfer, and we still model an increase here. Without considering ice coverage, there's still over a meter and a half surge at Nome. At Dog Dock, you still see increase over 2 meters of storm surge, despite that broad pack ice in the Bering Sea. Why, with all this pack ice, do we see a lot of storm surge still and an increase when we consider coverage? On the model side, the increase comes from the ice zone here at the Bering shelf break. So in the ice zone, we see an increased coefficient, and that increased levels there end up hitting from that spot across the shelf and to the coast, increasing coastal water levels. And what decrease you might get over broad shelf and the pack ice is not large enough to decrease coastal water levels. So this is something we found really interesting, and that have gone against all of the knowledge that people say if there's more ice, then you have significantly reduced storm surge. Well, it may be reduced in some cases, we're convinced that's always going to be the case. And so as mentioned earlier, we NOAA added another water level station, Complete, which is great. The more water level stations we have, the easier it is for us to validate these models, and it really makes make a lot better conclusions about how well we're performing. And so we were able to look at, in the January 2017 storm, just sort of middle ground between that coast ice and the pack ice over the entire shelf break, or the entire shelf. So we're in this 40 to 60, 70% range, where you're going to see a large increase in that drag coefficient across the ice area. And actually has a very similar path to the November 2011 and February 2011 storm across the Bering Sea here. You'll see same as large amounts of storm surge on the western coastline. We look at our the water levels again at our coastal points. More varied performance for these ice conditions than in the other two scenarios. So you see that we have significant underpredictions at the beginning of the storm, significant overpredictions during the storm, but at the peak of the storm we do almost perfect job at predicting that water level. So there's a lot of variability in terms of the model scale here. And this is the case at most of the water level stations we have. Again, Laclede, again, over-predictions, predictions, over-predictions, and then over-predictions again. And dock as well. It's a very similar pattern. From a number of limitations, which I'll state after I go through this next part here. Looking at this ice field here, you see that we expect an increase in levels, but it's a very broad and varied increase. So in here, you get over half a meter more, and in sound as well, and a whole broken up ice section, you get increased water levels. There's still some significant uncertainty when it comes to this ADCIRC ice interaction part. Essentially, go through this a little quickly. The only thing, we only consider the atmospheric side in our current approach. So the changing direction of ice drift with respect to the wind speed direction can change the direction in which ice is, or change the direction in which stress is added to the water, and water levels are changed. It also does consider fast ice, so areas where there'd be blockages, which could increase flow or stop flow. And mainly this is due to data limitations with the sourcing we're able to use on the model. So we only have relatively low resolution in time and space descriptions of what the ice field looks like. If we had a high resolution, more data-rich fields, we could resolve more of these errors. So, shift gears quickly. I want to go over what the available storm surge guidance looks like in Alaska now, and then I'll go quickly how we are looking to address both the issues with our model and the areas that the guidance doesn't cover at the moment. So the Extratropical Storm Surge, or ETSSurge model, which has the coverage for a storm surge model in this region, but doesn't have the resolution or full physics that the ADCIRC model that we're working on or the areas of the country have. So it does not. This is the SASH model, which solves similar versions of the same equations, just slightly simplified and over in a certain framework. So it can't have the same high resolution that we have in specific areas, especially over this larger region. And it does not model tides directly. So the newest version of these models are actually informed by the tidal model that we've developed in Notre. It does have very good coverage of the entire region. There's the SDOS model, the Extratropical Surge and Tide Forecast System. And that's a ADCIRC model similar to ours, but the coverage of the SDOS for the Pacific and Alaska region is pretty small at the moment. It does model tides. It does use the winds and pressures like we do. It does have relatively high coastal resolution, but I try to highlight this in red. You can see that this area is the only area covered by the model. We hope to contribute to the effort to expand this model north to cover the entire state of Alaska, hopefully merging the work that we've done. So the future work that we're looking to do, hoping to get fund on a proposal that we've been putting together and working at for a while, where the goal is building this full coupled model with operational forecasting capacity for Alaska, but it would really be a model for Alaska, the state of Alaska. And this would be done in collaboration with a number of different groups at other universities and with NOAA, and is also the AUS, Ocean Observing System, and also have support from a number of different NOAA groups and Alaskan stakeholders. This would be a very large 3-year project where we develop what we've already built into one that can be used in an operational forecast for the region. Yeah, tentatively approved, and we're really hoping it goes through because I think it'll be a lot in terms of the gaps in the region. So we have a lot that we're looking to achieve in this project, but I'll go over quickly what some of these points are. Fully coupled to a wave model running on top of the ADCIRC model. We have one with the small model now, but we don't have any real ice physics in that we want to expand on that. We're currently about to couple with the Watch 3 model, which works through this model framework that couples models together, the Earth System Modeling Framework, and this will allow us to concise the calculation of the wind waves which ride on top of the storm surge. This can inform and potentially help us in areas like that November 2011 storm. We saw that we had a significant underprediction of the peak at Nome. Earlier, we're significantly simplifying the sea ice problem. Is instead of just the changing tide coefficient, there's really a lot going on. You have some new ice flows, the shear of formations, different speeds and fractures, and so these all types of ices and changing ices are going to affect the water flow differently. And one way we can capture all of this is by coupling to a sea ice model. So the sea ice can compute the very complex directions that it uses to compute ice stresses. So no longer would have to parameterize the level that we do now, the exchange between the wind and the ocean in terms of some ice-covered area. So if we're going to sea ice model alongside with ADCIRC, we're able to inform it at a much more detailed manner. And this can be coupled in the same way we plan on doing the WaveWatch 3 coupling. And so I've tested a few ways. Here you can see what the ice drift looks like over some of the ice fields. And this is the changes, the differences you can see between our old approach and our new approach. So clearly there's some ground where I'll figure out exactly how this ice is affecting coast water levels. This is just the same for the next storm. So in terms of this regional forecasting capacity over the 3 years of the project, in year 1 we hope to complete the coupling to WaveWatch 3, do some studies on that air-sea ice drag coefficient that I've taught here, begin the coupling to sea ice, and by the end of the first year of that, we'll have a full forecasting capability driven by the climate model, which is hosted by the Alaska Ocean Observing System. And this will include an updated grid that would make it more efficient for running in real time and providing on the day of storm surge forecasting. Yeah, envision that looking something similar to this system, which is built for by a number of at USC, LSU, and a few other organizations where they've built a forecasting capacity for the East Gulf Coast of the United States. We hope that continuing that air-sea ice coefficient, complete coupling to sea ice, and then WaveWatch 3 into our forecasting system. Then year 3, we hope to fully update the forecasting capability to include ice, and then finish the uncertainty quantification So the final system we produce uses an accurate combination of model coupling, forcing products we use, and what specific model parameters we use in the models to get an accurate forecast for the Alaska region. So I'll finish up. Hopefully I didn't go too long, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
April Reynolds, it's great to see how far this has come along and what you guys have been able to do. That's really fantastic, and it's interesting to see the results with from incorporated ice drag. That's pretty thing, like you said. So the next steps that you just mentioned, is there commitment by anybody to fund those, or what's the status of that?
Yeah, we have a pretty firm initial commitment, I would say.
They sent notice that they're planning on coming.
Yes, that they're planning on funding it for us. So it's the Ocean Technology Transition Project, which is led by NOAA and ICE, the Integrated Ocean Observing System. And it's essentially going to be a collaboration with us, UTS, and the Great Lakes Environmental Research Lab, because they have experience with sea ice, sealing, and then AUs and a number of people. Yeah, hopefully, I think it's looking good so far, but that should be hopefully.
I hear that. Thank you.
All right, Brian, thanks. It's a great presentation. I'll give one or two more quick calls here. Is there anybody in the room in Anchorage who has any questions? Yourself off mute. Anybody else on the phone with questions? Have any? And you're speaking? You might take yourself off mute.
Hi, Brian. This is Cindy Sachs. I am USDOT ESF1 for Alaska. I just want to thank you very much for making this presentation. It was incredibly interesting, and what just pleases me most is that somebody is looking at the damage that happens to our coastline up here in Alaska. People expect us to get sea storms, but don't have a clue about the damage that happens if you don't have that layer of sea ice hugging the coast and protecting it. So I'm very glad you're working on this project, and I appreciate you coming all the way up here. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been, so most of our work has been East Coast and Gulf Coast, and there's a lot of resources going toward that. And as I said, you guys have so much space, and the conditions are so much harder. The storm's just as strong, and the impacts can be just as bad and even worse. So I think it's really important that I'm happy that people are fun to look at this, because it's a really important and big issue.
Agree.
Hey, this is Joel. I have one more question for you, Brian. And actually, I don't want to go there or not, but so given the importance of the drag when you have sort of that 30 to 60, 70% ice cover, trying to think what the implications of that are for as we go into less and less ice cover and less solid ice cover. And I don't know if you guys have sort of looked into the seasonality of what's happening with ice. Yeah. Anyways, you see where I'm going.
Yeah, I think that's the natural question to ask. And I mean, unfortunately, there's evidence on both sides. I mean, as the ice is not forming as far south, it's not forming as solid as it has in the past earlier, and that, I mean, from any type of precipitation, even if you don't use the one we're using specifically, that's going to mean more storm surge. And it also can be the side of the equation as well. So the more open space, that's one of the key of wave growth. The more open space for wave growth, they're going to be a lot larger, and those will affect the coast a lot more if there's more lead for the waves to grow, and they get more energy when they get to the coast. I think you're thinking in the right way, and we actually quantify how that will be extent the CS is affecting that. That's one of the main goals of what we're looking at.